Now, in order to implement cloud computing, there are 5 specific roles, and we want to know those roles. We want to know the function of each of these. So these are referred to as our cloud computing actors. And once again, this is specified by NIST. And just this little illustration kind of gives you an idea of the responsibilities of each entity. All right, so we said before, think of ourselves as the cloud consumer or the cloud customer. They'll probably refer to it as consumer, but customer's fine too. So I'm the entity that's going to be using the services of the cloud. I'm the customer. Now, the cloud service provider, this is the entity that's providing the services, whether there's software that they're providing, platforms for software development, or infrastructure. Ultimately, we look at Amazon Web Services or Microsoft Azure, or we look at those cloud service providers that are out there that have something to provide, something to serve. But how do I know which one of those to choose? There are a lot of different options. They're very large cloud service providers. They're much smaller ones. What's going to meet my needs? Well, I might go to a cloud service provider, to a cloud broker that's going to help me figure out what services I need and match that to a cloud service provider. They're going to kind of be the intermediary between the consumer and the provider. They're going to provide advice, suggestions, perhaps arbitration in case there's some sort of violation of what the cloud service provider has provided and the service we're getting. There's also going to be a cloud auditor. Auditing is a really important piece because what's normally been handled in-house by us, what we can put our hands on, now we're sending that out to this mysterious cloud throughout the internet, and we don't necessarily get to see, we don't have the same visibility that we've had. So we look to our auditors to provide an assessment of, does this cloud service provider meet the terms of their service level agreement? Are they reliable? Are they following the processes that they profess to be following? So all of those pieces, and then ultimately we have a cloud carrier, right? This is our internet service provider, the service provider we're using to connect to the cloud, so that infrastructure of devices from our organization up all the way throughout the various services. If your cloud carrier isn't there, if you can't access Amazon Web Services or Azure or any of the others, none of that other stuff matters. So we need these various elements, and you'll see other variations of these, but ultimately these are the 5 actors as specified by NIST. Okay. And I keep referring to NIST 500-291, and that's the Cloud Computing Standards Roadmap. And if you think about why we would use a roadmap, we have a vague idea of where we want to be, but I need a more practical set of instructions or processes, procedures to really get to where I want to be, right? I need to take this general idea of, I want to migrate to the cloud, and I got to figure out how to really practically make that happen. So this document, NIST Special Publication 500-251, that's exactly the purpose of this document. It's a Cloud Computing Standards Roadmap by the National Institute of Standards and Technologies. This is one of those documents that I would highly recommend that you read. So you can download that online, NIST 500-291. Later, we're also going to be examining NIST 500-292 as well, and that's going to be very relevant also. All right, so nothing comes to us without risks. We want to move to the cloud, take advantage of all those wonderful benefits. Of course we do. Well, what about the downside of that? Well, the downside is, we're shifting from capital expenditure to operational expenditure, and that's a benefit, but if we're paying more month for month than we would have overall paid with capital, we've got to be aware of that. So we can't just look at, hey, I was going to put out $5 million. Now I'm only putting out $450. I can't think about things that way. And that's not an accurate price, but, just off the top of my head, right? So the idea is we really have to understand we may wind up spending more money ultimately by moving to the cloud. All right. Also, our resources are distributed throughout the internet. Our data may be stored on multiple servers in multiple physical jurisdictions. And when we talk about jurisdictional differences, laws vary. Even in the states, laws vary from state to state. How much more so from country to country, region to region? So we have to be aware we need a service level agreement that will dictate or mandate or specify, however you want to think about it, the degree of security that our resources have regardless of where they're stored, right? We need something that transcends local jurisdictions, local requirements, because various nations throughout the world may provide, very inexpensive access. They may be utilized by our cloud service provider, but we need to know that the protection of our data isn't based just on, all right, data in this location is protected a certain way, but data over here is protected differently. We need that assurance, and we get that through a service level agreement. Greatest threat, though, to the security of our information is multi-tenancy. We have shared resources. My information is going to be on the same physical drive as tens of other organizations, maybe scores of other organizations, who knows? So anytime you're sharing the same physical components, that opens us up to risk. Absolutely. Now, of course, our cloud service provider should have many controls in place that keeps one organization from accessing resources from another, that keeps VMs from having, malware escape the VM, and should. But how do we know? We're not the ones running the reports, and usually we don't even get reports from the cloud service provider to that degree of depth. Right? There are certain things we can audit, there's certain information we can request, and there's other information that we cannot. So, multi-tenancy. Not to mention the fact that, what about forensics? What about if there's an incident? How does my cloud service provider respond? What degree of responsibility did they have to notify us if there's a breach? How is that monitored and audited? Just because you're required to notify customers doesn't mean you do. Right? So how's that monitored? What about forensics? If the hard drive needs to be physically analyzed, that's going to be very different in a cloud service provider environment. So we have all of these challenges, not the least of which, like I said, we're not transferring responsibility. We're not transferring, let me try that again. We're transferring risk. We're not transferring responsibility or liability. And this is something for the test, and this is something to know for the world. The responsibility for the protection of data will always reside on the customer. The security of data is always the customer's responsibility. So, like I said, I'm a medical provider. I use cloud services. Doesn't matter. Still my responsibility. I have personal financial information, store it in the cloud. I get a service level agreement. That doesn't matter. I'm still liable. I can sue the cloud service provider. I can seek remediation. But as far as liability for the compromise of data, still on me. Okay? All right, privacy. Never assume you have a certain degree of protection. Just never assume that. The degree of protection you have is what's specified in the service level agreement. No more, no less. So we've got to be very thorough and use due diligence in going through these service level agreements and matching the SLA to our own internal needs. And then last, this slide actually has a little typo. It says CSA may have higher requirements. That should be CSP. Your cloud service provider may very well have stronger requirements than you do, right? That may be a form of mitigating risks, but don't assume that. Don't assume that they can do it better than we can, because the cloud service provider will meet the terms of the service level agreement, period. So how much security they provide? Read your SLA.